Hello, everyone, and welcome today to the Talent Collective Fireside Chat with two wonderful speakers that we have here. Today, we are going to be talking about total compensation and rewards. Of course, we will be hitting on some like salary topics, but a lot of other creative ideas for a total compensation and total rewards package. So as you're coming in, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We'd love for you to put your name in the chat, maybe where you're calling in from. Feel free to also put your LinkedIn profile so people can connect with one another. And then at the end of this, we are going to have a Q&A. So as you're listening and observing, please feel free to put any questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring those. If it tends to be the right time, I'll just chime in and ask Lola and John in the moment. Otherwise, I'll keep those questions for the very end. I already have a couple of questions that came in from the form that I sent out. So if those were yours, thank you so much. So we'll go ahead and dive in here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Talent Collective, we are a community for women in the talent acquisition space. So we do in-person events, virtual experiences such as this, but a lot more, workshops. We have a mentorship program, peer groups, and a ton of other really amazing benefits for our members. We're here today to, again, talk about total compensation. So would love to dive right in. We're going to have a few questions for John and Lola. Would love for them to also introduce themselves. But one of the reasons that I really wanted to have this conversation, we've actually done a couple of different fireside chats in the series. This is actually the final one. So I was ahead of people at a small startup, and compensation was definitely one of the hardest things that I had to tackle. And I know it can be very confusing and just a really intricate topic that is sensitive to most people. I mean, it has to do with their livelihood. So it's really important that companies get it right. And so thankfully today we have John Alarcon and Lola Han here to help us through some of those questions. So Lola is the CEO and co-founder of Kamza, and John is the co-founder at WorkLife. So would love for both of you to introduce yourselves. And Lola, if you want to start and kind of give us a background of, where you've been in your career, what you're doing now, and tell us more about Kamza as well.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in lots of head of compensation roles at companies like Zendesk. Also spent time as a compensation consultant at top HR consulting firms like Willis Towers Watson. Over time, after helping many companies with their compensation, I found it really difficult to do the routine things related to compensation that you need to do, like having access to reliable global market data, help with job leveling. There was no good tool in the market to really help with all those things in one place. So started it and developed Kamza myself back in 2017 now. And since then, we've helped hundreds of companies with all the things I mentioned with the compensation program.
Thank you. All right. And John.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, everyone. John Alarcon, one of the co-founders at WorkLife. My background's kind of coming from the rewards and recognition space. So I spent the last 10 years roughly in HR tech. Prior to that, I've been at various, VC funded startups. And so over the last decade, I've been in customer success roles, previously head of customer success at a seed round company. We scaled the Series A, close to $50 million in sales. And, as we kind of grew, being that close to the customer, I got to launch personally 400 plus customers, got to really kind of understand the inside scoop of how they think about their people strategy, how they think about their incentive comp strategies. And so I'm looking at it more from that angle and hopefully giving some insight into some different approaches. For example, if you can't do pay increases each year. And I think, kind of the impetus for WorkLife was more as I worked with more and more customers in the rewards and recognition space, kind of the perimeter, the edge of rewards and recognition started to blur with wellness and comp and perks and benefits and all these things. And it just kind of became this really convoluted approach that companies were taking. And so we decided to kind of take a step back, simplify and really kind of like consolidate the approach for companies and make sure it still kind of had meaning and built culture. And so that was kind of the impetus for work life, is just simplifying and consolidating, but still driving what's meaningful to employees. So at the end of the day, you'll hear me kind of refer to supplementary compensation, maybe as a term. And that we're really just kind of a layer for companies and their post-tax rewards. So things like incentives, things like rewards programs, things like even fringe benefits, things like that. So anything kind of post-tax. It's a little bit about us.
Thank you so much, John. And fun fact, John and Lola know each other from way back when, 2016-ish. So John was one of Lola's customers when she was at Zendesk. So they go way back, which is really fun. So we're going to start actually with you, John. So as you mentioned, the work that you're doing at WorkLife, your biggest focus is on creative compensation plans and plans that incentivize employees. So can you talk a little bit more about that and kind of like the big picture behind total comp? Like, why are we doing the things we're doing and why are we offering incentive comp, just to start?
Yeah, I think foundationally, we can probably all agree, like, the whole point of total rewards is just to attract talent, like to give people, a place where they feel like, hey, I can stay here. I can build a career here. I don't need to be looking to see if the grass is greener on the other side at a different role or in a different company. And so I think foundationally, when you think about total rewards, it should help people get to where they want to be in life and feel like they have what they need to kind of create the life that they want, whatever that looks like. And so I think that's probably a foundational kind of component, is like attracting talent, but then also making sure that they feel like they can stay. I think when you look at a layer of comp that kind of we specialize in, which is like that supplementary compensation, it's more to derive behavior, or I guess more specifically, change behavior to drive the outcomes that you want to see in the business. And so, if we think about, or kind of how I think about total rewards, is you have a baseline layer of, we'll say salary and commissions and, maybe you have hourly workers in your organization. There's kind of like your baseline compensation. That's intended to cover necessities, help them feel like, okay, I can make progress and build. You have kind of a middle layer of pre-tax benefits, maybe, which is like your 401ks, your health insurance plans, things like that. And so everything above and beyond that is what we kind of cover. And so again, I think the layer that we kind of focus on is changing behavior and driving towards outcomes that you want to see. And kind of how we think of it is that what gets celebrated gets replicated. And so it's about kind of having an understanding of where you want to go and what outcomes you want to drive, and then what are the behaviors to get there, and then how do you acknowledge those behaviors and acknowledge those results so that people keep doing them, whatever it may be in the business.
Mm-hmm. I think the companies that do that well tend to see really high performance. I know just within the recruiting space, I've known a few companies and more on the agency side, but that really tie in, like have those conversations about what's important to you as a person outside of work, and how can we get you there, right? And like starting from that place of the bigger picture about the person's life and what's important to them, can really drive their performance at work. So I think it's a really, really cool model, and that you've noticed that and you're really like honing into that. So within the world of compensation, I know this is a little tricky for companies right now, especially given the state that tech is in right now, and a lot of other companies. But when you talk about like going above and beyond with regards to compensation, what does that typically look like for companies?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to knowing what you're trying to achieve as a business in that year, or in your let's just say next 3 years as part of your strategic plan. I'm glad that you called out that the last couple of years have been tough, because I think if you look at the bigger picture, the last decade, especially in the startup space, there's a lot of good times. There's a lot of like success and exits, and the term unicorn was coined and all these things. It seemed like everything was up and to the right. And so it was almost easy mode in terms of thinking about, actually, I shouldn't say that. It's never easy mode thinking about comp, but adding more became kind of a default for companies and how they think about their strategy. And I think employees got used to that. And so it became kind of you kind of hear some leaders lament like entitled employees currently. It's tough. It's a tough environment where you have this kind of friction between employees kind of asking for more, and then, hey, it's not as good of a time the last couple of years, and so companies can't give more. And so it's a challenging environment to try to use that approach of giving more. So if you had to kind of start from scratch, and instead of giving more, back up and say, well, what is the right approach? Well, the right approach is giving the right things to employees. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, well, what are the right things? Historically, what you would do is do surveys for employees. You'd do culture surveys. You would, figure out what's the highest voted like perk or the highest voted benefit that our employees want. But at the end of the day, like if you get 60% of people that say, I want a 401k, that means 40% of people voted no on that passively. So how do you actually go about, doing something meaningful in a total reward package for employees? Well, it has to start with what they actually care about at the individual level, which is really hard to do at scale. In fact, I think once you get past like, 30, 40 employees, it's nearly impossible to know each and every person in your organization to the degree where you can actually support them as a whole person. And so, I think one of the things, and this is part of our approach, and at a larger scale, you'll see things like lifestyle savings accounts, LSAs, that are starting to become more popular as a vehicle to actually drive some of the programming and some of the ways to actually facilitate programs that help employees. But I think, foundationally, some of the things that you can do are take a step back, understand the individual motivators of the employees in your company, which usually that lives at the manager level. And then take a look at their job descriptions, when you're looking at your performance management approaches. Take a look at, well, do our people know what good looks like in their role? And then develop programs for the folks that do go above and beyond in their role. That can look like short-term incentives. That can look like spot rewards, giving budget to managers to be able to divvy out as people go above and beyond. It really comes down to like, what are the things that are important drivers in your business, and how do we identify the behaviors that are helping move the needle on those drivers and those metrics?
I didn't have this as a planned question, but I'd love to chime in and ask an impromptu question if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
So you mentioned that it's hard to know and understand what the individual employee wants at scale, right? But how does a company go about providing that individualized approach at scale, right? Like from the company's standpoint, like it has to make sense financially. You have to have some kind of like you can't just call up your benefits people and be like, I want to give this to one person, right? So what does that look like?
Yeah, I think it's starting out, it's a mindset shift. Because funny enough, a lot of the things that people are striving for in life actually don't fit in a benefits box. And if you look at like over the past 5 years or so, there's been a lot of kind of like siloed offerings that have popped up in the HR tech stack. I know we're talking about like, this field specifically, but it might be parental leave benefits. It might be like return to work benefits. It might be like there's a whole suite of kind of siloed offerings. And they're good companies, and they're good things that are being supported, but it doesn't apply to everyone. And so I think the first thing is a mindset shift on like, well, are those things necessarily being sought after by our employees? And the way kind of I think of it is there has to be kind of a decentralized approach to understanding the individual. It can't come from like just one person in the organization. So part of and this is just kind of separately from work life, like part of our process is software to understand that. For companies that aren't working with work life, what this might look like is training managers to have these sorts of conversations with their employees and the people on their team in their one-on-ones, understanding like, hey, why are you here? If you're hiring someone that's like, say, 25 years old and this maybe is their first or second job out of college, helping understand like what does the next 3 years look like for you, not just in a career pathing standpoint, but what are you working towards? Like, do you want to buy a house someday? Do you want to like write a book someday? Do you want to travel to a different country someday? Like, what are those things that are motivating you and driving you that are outside of the workplace that are actually going to keep you here, even if we're not giving you a 5% or 10% salary bump each year? What are those things that if you feel like you're making progress towards them, you're going to feel like this is the place for you? Because we care about those things and we're actually helping you draw a straight line between what it is you care about and how your work is helping you get there. And I think that's a tough mindset shift because sometimes the things that people care about are beyond the tenure of their time at that company. So if someone has a goal to buy a house, that might be a 10-year endeavor for them, and they're probably not going to be at your company for 10 years. So the mindset shift is like, how can we help support people to get to where they want to go, even if it means they're not here any longer? Like, how can we actually help that happen, or give people the best chances at success for that? And I believe, and the data shows that the companies that do that have better performance. You mentioned it earlier as well, Krista. But based on the data that's out there, they're performing over 3.5 times as well for publicly traded companies that are in similar industries, things like that. And so the data shows that taking that approach of actually caring about your people and helping them helps you as a business too.
You also mentioned earlier, I think it was called the lifestyle savings account. I'd never heard of that. Could you explain a little bit more about that and what is it and what's the trend there?
Yeah, totally. So you're probably familiar with like flexible savings accounts, FSAs. You're probably familiar with HSAs. Now there's an LSA, so maybe there'll be an ESA or something 2 years from now, who knows? But basically, it's a different form of a spending account for employees. And so some of the main differences are, one, it's not as gated in terms of what you spend it on. So if you have like an HSA account, for example, that's intended for healthcare, and you, for example, if you go to CVS and you put a bottle of aspirin and Skittles on the register, you'll be able to buy aspirin, but you won't be able to buy the Skittles with your HSA card. It'll just decline it. With an LSA, you can use it towards things, it doesn't matter. It's less restricted. The main difference is because of that, it's a post-tax account. So you can't get pre-tax money for it. But it does give the flexibility where, if you're a company that, for example, one of our customers, they have a travel program where they want to every single year encourage people to take a week off and go on a travel experience somewhere. They can use an LSA account to drop money in that for their employee, and they can use that to spend towards like booking hotels or flights or things like that for their vacation that they want to give them each year. And so it opens up kind of a world of flexibility in how they actually, incentivize and how they, kind of motivate their employees and how they support them.
Okay, interesting. And where my head is going, I have another question, but I want to ask our next question first because it ties into this. But so a lot of companies, as we mentioned earlier, are just in a tough financial place, have either done massive layoffs or just don't have cash, don't have a lot of cash right now. So really can't make pay increases in an environment like this. So what are your clients doing, or what do you recommend that they do for benefits or just to keep people incentivized in situations like this?
Yeah, totally. I think The main thing is tying to business outcomes, which I think inherently any type of good, well-structured incentive program should be tied to a business outcome. That's the whole point of it. And I think for a while there, perks and benefits started to be kind of decoupled from, the performance of the company. And so, some of the more kind of creative things that I'm seeing, one of our customers is ServPro. If you're not familiar with them, they're in the water damage and restoration industry. So they're one of those like $8 billion companies that no one knows about until they need them. But if your pipes freeze and your basement floods or something like that, they'll come fix it, right? So these are kind of like higher ticket projects that they're working on, but they have more hourly employees actually doing the work on them. And so one of the more interesting things that they're doing is they're actually starting to do profit sharing, or I should say job profitability sharing with the members that are actually on certain job sites. And so what that looks like is these are, again, hourly employees. They're making 20, 25 bucks an hour. They're actually, they call them crew cuts, but in a given month for the jobs that they close out, they look at, okay, did you finish the job on time? Did you show up on time to the job site? And did we exceed an expected profit margin on that job? So did you, for example, not accidentally ding your ladder on the customer's refrigerator? Now we have to pay an insurance claim, to fix the refrigerator. Did you not rear end another car as you were driving the company truck? Like those types of things that eat into your margins as a business owner. And so they actually set aside 2% of those completed jobs as part of this crew cut, where anything above and beyond a certain margin, they set aside 2% of that job to split between the teams that did that job. So very unique in the industry because there aren't very many companies that, for hourly employees think about, first off, empowering their on-site employees to have an ownership kind of mindset of the job site, but then actually sharing the profits with them too. And so, these are kind of common issues that you see in that industry, but for them, it's well worth it to spend 2% of that profitability above a certain mark to make sure they're still having what they need as a business, but they're also giving to their employees. And, for us, they just drop it into their work-life balance account, which is an LSA style account, and then their employees can go spend it on the things that matter to them. So.
On that note, we got a question in the chat about the LSA. Does it have federal oversight?
Is the question, Gina, more like on what is spent, or
No, just like how would you structure that? Because I've never heard of it, and I think it's brilliant. I have heard of the profit. That's very common in a construction world, but I love that. So is it as restricted, anything else, 401k, everything else is restricted? Can a company just set it up? It's their, there's no regulation. We're just setting it up and putting our profits in here, and there's no tracking of that.
Yeah, so I don't want to say there's no oversight, but there isn't any restrictions on what the money can be spent on. And I think one of the main differences is like when it's taxed. And so it is considered taxable income. And so like how we use it in our product is like if a company sets up a sales incentive, for their sales team. Everyone has a work-life balance account on their sales team. As they earn like an incentive, for example, the sales manager will just drop, whatever it is, 500 bucks or something into their work-life balance. And they can spend it on, what matters to them. Separately, like, we want to encourage people to spend it on meaningful things and not spend it like at the grocery store necessarily, but they could spend it there if they wanted to. And again, it's because it's post-tax. They've been taxed on that as income.
So similar to a Roth, it's structured like a Roth.
Yeah. They're not as much financial regulation as like an IRA, but yeah, to your point, you can do what you want with the Roth because it's post-tax.
Love it.
Cool.
Love that. I'm telling everyone about it.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm happy to send you just some details and kind of how we use it too.
Please.
So
Please, that's great.
cool.
Okay, thanks. One more question in the chat and then would love to get to Lola. So could you speak to designing total rewards when you have distinct groups of employees? So for example, new grads doing customer service, senior software developers who have families, employees who are maybe at a satellite office, etc.
Sure. Oh, this is from someone in the chat from Lauren.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's reflective of kind of the work environment right now. Because is it 5 generations in the workplace currently? You know, if you have a company of 1,000 employees, gosh, you have people that are on their way out and people that are on their way in and everything in between. It's a very diverse workforce. The wants and needs of the workforce have changed. I know for myself, when I you know, first got married, and what I wanted was way different than now that we have 3 small kids and a house and another one due in 2 months. And so, yeah, I think when you're thinking of total rewards, Lola's more the expert on like the actual salary type stuff, but when it comes to designing like incentives or that supplementary compensation layer, I think a good approach is to one, make sure you know what motivates your people. So why do they show up to work each day? Again, this typically lives at the manager level. So making sure that people have those conversations. And then the second thing is make sure that everyone knows what good looks like in their role. I think that's part of the challenging part of a you know, a total reward strategy, at least from an incentive comp standpoint. Oftentimes people don't know if they're making progress towards, you know, good, if they don't necessarily know if they're performing well. And then they don't know if like what's in it for them is worth it. And so going back to the question, yeah, when you're designing, you know, think about the business outcomes that you want. Think about those roles that people have and what above and beyond looks like in their roles. And then you can do things, for example, I mentioned spot rewards earlier. That's a really common approach where, you know, let's just say you have 100 people in your company, 8 managers, give each manager, you know, $100 a month. $200 a month, something like that, to be able to divvy out as rewards to their employees as they see them going above and beyond, like on the spot. Hey, appreciate your efforts this week. Hey, great job, you know, finishing that project early, or really love how you supported that customer in, you know, this week and you know, driving their implementation, whatever it may be. You know, especially as you have you know, customer support, software developers. Yeah, it's all about them knowing what good looks like and then knowing when they're going above and beyond and then rewarding that appropriately.
Okay,
Hopefully
perfect.
it's helpful, Lauren.
Yeah. One last question on the LSA, but it'll be quick. Do you know if it has a tax savings for the company?
Not necessarily. I would say, to be conservative, no. And again, it's because it's more so a vehicle to kind of create flexibility for the employee. I know there are some kind of tax saving type programs you could run through it. So, for example, like L&D budget, you know, if you wanted to give that to employees, and you know, I'm sure there's write-offs and things that you can do depending on what that's spent on. But the account itself, I don't believe has tax savings on it.
Mhm. Okay, great, thank you. All right, Lola, let's shift the conversation over to you. I have a few questions prepared for you. So as we mentioned, your expertise is much more on the side of like actual income, compensation, leveling. So that first question that we have for you has to do with leveling. So when you're working with your customers who may be recruiters at Comza, they typically have challenges in leveling a job or the whole organization correctly. I know that I struggled with that when I was in my role. And one thing, if you know how to level effectively, you can consult the hiring manager more effectively and more, you know, in a more impactful way. So how do you recommend tackling this big project of leveling?
Yeah, I'm all about keeping things simple, but also keeping in mind, you know, you need to make it scalable, right? So, you know, let's say you have a IC or individual contributor track, management track, keep it simple, like IC7 or, you know, up to IC7, maybe from IC1, management, maybe team leads which is kind of like that supervisory level all the way to chief level. And then establish, again, simple definitions for each level. So things like compensable factors, like, of course, level of responsibility that you expect at that level. What kind of impact will they have? Are they interacting with mostly executives? Is their, responsibilities more routine? Maybe, they, how's their independent discretion, et cetera, right? Kind of build those level descriptions. You can keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Maybe over time you can build more like software engineer specific competencies, et cetera. But that can be like phase 2 or even 3, right? So, keeping it simple, and then, really I find it valuable no matter if you're like a 20 employee company, start the job leveling structure and process, because I've never heard a customer regret that they started too soon, right? I have seen them regret it when they did it too late, because it's like, hiring managers and recruiters are maybe not aligned on the level that they recruited for. So if they had those structure and definitions in place, for example, like let's say a CFO needed a financial analyst, right? It's like, okay, fine, I think I need a senior financial analyst, right? But then you hire senior financial analyst, but then later on the CFO discovers, oh no, I needed someone with more experience that can talk to the executives like a partner, right? So it's like, oh, you actually wanted an IC5. So now it's like kind of a mishire, maybe a waste of money, right? On the flip side, maybe you're like, yeah, let's hire a CMO. We need to like go wild with the brand recognition. But then later on, you're like, no, I needed a doer, like to post, social media posts, like just be a doer, right? So it could save even a lot of money in potential mishires. So that's how but keep it simple, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've also seen big issues with not having the leveling in place. You hire someone, either the hiring manager or maybe even at a small company, executive leadership just throws a level out there. And then once you do put the leveling in place, it's like, oh, that person really isn't at that level. And so then how do you scale that back? How do you have that conversation with this person, especially when there's pay scales attached to leveling? So it can get really tricky really fast if you don't have it in place from the start.
Yeah, and a common thing I've seen is during you're finding candidates and then they're negotiating higher salaries. So then to get that approval, you say, okay, fine, like we're hiring an IC5 just so you can get that salary approved. When really they're an IC4, right? So it's not really fair expectation-wise when they join. Then it's like, which level should they be expected to be doing, right? So if they're not operating at the IC5 that you expected, that's not really fair for the candidate. And then what I've also seen is a lot of, of course, there's been a lot of layoffs and everything. And let's say someone that was a principal software engineer at a company, let's say that got laid off, and they're now looking for another principal software engineer, but they're not getting callbacks, and it might be because, well, you're looking for principal software engineer jobs, but you're really senior software engineer skills and experience, right? So often it can be like not a good thing for employees to over title them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had candidates interview for roles, I think, in similar situations where they're saying, well, I'm leveled at this at my company. It's like, well, we wouldn't bring you in at that, right? Because we have a different leveling system and you wouldn't be paid that. So it makes for a tricky offer conversation as well. So before we move on to the next question, which was switching topics a little bit, we have a question in the chat. So on job leveling, I feel like sometimes a quote unquote level 2 is the equivalent of a level 1 who exceeds expectations. Is that a helpful approach, or should the level 1 and level 2 have different KSAs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we do with customers is do this leveling by job family. So for example, a job family, we look at the business need and the expectations. So for example, I'm just going to make one up, like a receptionist, you're not going to need 7 job levels, right? Software engineers, yes, you might need 7 job levels, but like an IC2 customer service rep is not going to have the same band as a, I don't know, people operations IC2 necessarily, right? So with all that said, just do it by job family. And I almost feel like a lot of the times just ignore the level number, because a lot of employees get stuck on that number. Like, I want to be an IC4 next, right? But it's like almost like delete that column and focus on the title. So you're a software engineer now. Now let's work you up to a senior software engineer. And these are the expectations, right? So depending on the job, I'd have to analyze it further if it's a level 1 or level 2 and at your organization, what that means. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So moving a little bit away from leveling, pay transparency has been a really big hot topic these last couple of years, especially in states like California and I think maybe New York, where you have to post a pay range basically on your posting. And we've all seen, and I've probably been a culprit of in the past, posting a really wide range on the job description or on the posting. So how do you recommend going about pay transparency, identifying the most appropriate and realistic range to put on a posting?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to cover in we only have a little bit of time, but I'll keep it like simple and streamlined. So, obviously you're going to build after job leveling, you're going to build these, let's say salary ranges aligned to the compensation philosophy you choose, right? So maybe for non-technical jobs, you choose to target the median or the market 50th percentile. And then for technical jobs, let's say you choose to target the market 75th percentile to make sure, you hire really good talent for those technical jobs, right? In its simplest form, it's like use the range, but also then factor an internal average or internal data. So for example, if you're your company that happens to, like, for whatever reason, due to budget reasons, there are some folks below the range, then be mindful of that, because employees are going to go look at the range. So maybe hopefully you don't have anyone below market, below the range, but let's say you do have some folks that are on the lower end of the range, then maybe post the minimum to the midpoint, right? As a starting point for that range. And the other, the range, I recommend most of the time, it depends on the country, of course, you're in, but let's say for the US, 15% swing on each side between the midpoint. So minimum being, 85% of the midpoint, the maximum being 115% of the midpoint, respectively. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great recommendation. Thank you. You just mentioned globally and, hiring internationally. So for those of people out there who are recruiting globally, structuring compensation can be really complicated. So what are some of the common approaches that you advise your clients, and which ones are best for what type of company?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for a remote, companies that are hiring remotely, let's say globally, there's two main approaches. One is targeting the local market data, and the second approach is using a geographic differential approach. So the local market data is using the local market data to establish the ranges. So for example, UK, let's say you're establishing ranges for UK, use the UK local market data to build those ranges. For India, use India local market data, et cetera. And then for geographic differential approach, of course, is using a percentage of, let's say, US national market data. So for example, we have a nifty, kind of reference list of all these countries and what percentage of US national average should you use if you want to use the geographic differential method. That, of course, incorporates, cost of labor and cost of living blended in it, but it's a nice round like percentage of US national. So if you want to, for example, add a little bit of premium to the local market data to, because you want to find the best talent wherever they are, use the geographic differential. If you want to more align with the local market data, because maybe you want to be mindful of budget, use the local market data. I would say the most popular method is using the local market data. But then, in certain markets, like for example, Argentina's hot growing market, and so is Colombia right now, right? Some clients choose to use the geographic differentials for like those markets instead of the local market data.
Okay, great, perfect. So we're going to shift over to a couple of questions that came in prior to the session. And so either or both of you can answer. So where should I look for compensation bands if I don't have a paid tool to use?
Yeah, it's kind of like the opposite of you get what you pay for. It's like, unfortunately to get access to reliable market data, you do have to pay for it because like the Glassdoors, yes, they're free, but it's publicly sourced data, so it's not as reliable. So I could be, let's say, a software engineer, and I'm like, yeah, I make 200K, but it's like, no, you don't really make 200K. And you're not really a senior software engineer. 180 of that is base, and the rest of it is actually bonus, or you know what I mean? So it's not as accurate, but it's a good start if you like really don't have any budget. But I would just say go fight for your market data, ask your CFO. You really need the market data so you can make better pay decisions and even potentially help save the company money. So I've seen a lot of clients when they come on board, I'm like looking at some non-US employees pay and I'm like, oh my goodness, they can get like mansions over at the where they're living, you know what I mean? But it's just because they didn't know the market data. They're like, oh yeah, that looks, lower than US data. So that sounds good deal. But yeah, it was actually way above market.
Wow. And I think especially when you have leveling, like that's where having solid data, it really comes into play, because even when you are paying for a data source, sometimes there can be conflicting data within there, right? If there's not like a big enough pool. So just to have like one generic Glassdoor salary is really, really off oftentimes. And then let's see, could you talk more about percent equity as part of the comp package for Series A startups?
Yeah, I mean, that's so I'll just kind of keep it broader for just is like as long as you're not a seed. So let's say like generally Series A to E-ish. Again, get access to market equity data, which CompSci has, right? And you take that value and simply divide it by your company's estimated per share value. So, for example, preferred share price minus last 49A. And then you build this model out to establish the ranges based on that market data, but also there's a little bit of art in it because it's like you don't want to spend too many shares, or your board probably wants to stay within a certain percentage of fully diluted shares. So we actually offer a model that helps do that, like where it like says based on market data, it's this, but like if you want to notch it down because of fully diluted shares is too high, like, you can, and then it recalculates the shares you need. But yeah, in some, like find the market equity data and leverage that to establish the bands for equity for new hires. Generally for Refish, it's about 25% of the new hire grant guidelines. And then establish it by level. So like for IC1s, it's this, IC2s, it's this. You can break it out by technical jobs. It's a little bit higher than the non-technical jobs.
Okay, perfect. So next, are the days of .com benefits gone? For example, whiskey bars, lunches every day. And is equity still a big deal for the up and coming generations?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it is dying a little bit, only because, valuations, of course, are coming down. But I think what's key is for companies, whether it's maybe the recruiting team as they're, hiring, or maybe it's the hiring manager, that can be decided amongst the company, but really selling the equity and the growth potential of it, right? That's just so key. Otherwise, they just don't understand. A lot of employees just don't understand how it works, and unless you share it and just assume they don't know. It's like just tell them how it works, and again, sell the upside of the equity.
Great. John.
And just to maybe interject in that a little bit, I totally agree with Lola. I think especially the last couple of years, we mentioned how, hey, the startup space has really slowed down, and valuations are down. Companies are starting to have to take down rounds in their funding. One, typically earlier stage employees typically don't understand equity packages. So it's not as motivating in essence. But two, the actual outcomes from those equity packages aren't necessarily attractive or don't come to fruition necessarily. And so I would say, just from what I'm hearing, this is more anecdotal, just talking to a lot of companies. It's less enticing for some of the newer employees, but still a very important part of comp packages, especially at the director and above level. So don't sleep on it, but it's not as much of a carrot to earlier employees now.
Do you think, sorry, can I ask a question?
Go ahead, yeah, please.
Do you think for both of you, so, I deal with equity every day, and we've been saying for years, first of all, it's not just the up and comers that don't understand it. Execs don't understand a cap table, right? No one genuinely understands all the cap tables. But do you think that what I've seen, and I'm trying to determine if I'm being too negative about it, is just gravy. Like, stop talking about it. Not that we don't negotiate it on a daily basis, but I just am curious if, I don't know, it just seems like it's gone. And now we are really negotiating all on base comp. And base comp needs to come up, and people are kind of having equity over here. And then the second point is, there is no standard, in my opinion, on any kind of equity percentage. I hear it all the time from especially CFOs. I get 2%, standard 3%. There is no standard. In my experience, every company is different, right? It's like whatever your cap table is, and here's your percentages. But I'm just trying to figure out if I'm a little bit gone too far on this point of kind of like, put it over there, the chances of you having any life-altering income based off of equity is pretty low, even over the last 15 years.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think to your point, it's not going away because, let's say candidates considering an offer from your company, but then they're going to get equity be offered equity likely if in a comparable company, right? So you have to give it, otherwise, like, okay, well, I'm not getting equity here, I'm going to get equity over there. So you have to offer it. But I think it'll get back to being more enticing.
Sure.
I do see, to your point, more focus on cash. So, a lot of companies are, oh, maybe we should start offering bonus now. And then bring it up to their CFO, and they're like, no, we don't have the budget right now.
Right.
But a good compromise is maybe, let's say for a certain role, the market is saying you should get 10% bonus, but let's compromise CFO to 5%, right? And CFO, how about we make it more of an above and beyond type of cash payout, like, essentially like profit sharing bonus, right? Let's say the company has to meet a certain threshold also to make it even harder. Like, you have to achieve at least 90% of your revenue target for any bonus to pay out. You could even say 100% or whatever, right? But making it based on, revenue target, let's say, and then making it like a little more above and beyond. And for the high performers only, for example, that's just an option that I've seen companies more and more think about, is more profit sharing focus.
That's awesome.
Okay, and then one more questions. This goes back to the pay transparency and putting pay ranges on postings. Do you think companies are posting wider ranges to not discourage candidates from applying? So I assume that means to encourage them to apply. Was that right? I think, Gina, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I also think many companies just don't know the right range to put. So they're just like, let me put a huge wide range. And it drives me crazy when companies do that, because it's like, okay, it's between 100,000 and 1 million. It's like, oh, great, thanks.
Great range.
Yeah, like, at a max, it should be maybe 20% swing on each side, but really I think it's because they want the flexibility, like to be like, oh, candidate, actually, no, you're going to be on the way lower end because of your experience, or like, you know what I mean? It's hard to get into the heads of those that do that, but I don't like it.
I don't like the post at all. I mean, that's just my opinion. I don't like it. And I think part of my question, Kristen, was in our world, we are trying to gather as many candidates as possible. And we all know that, I'll give you an example. There was a post on one of our searches, 175 to 200, or excuse me, 150 to 175. We ended up hiring somebody more senior at 250.
Right. Yeah, whoops, I think she got.
Gina froze.
Yeah. Yeah, she brings up a great point that
I
Even
froze.
if you don't put the, oh, you were,
Elon, I'm on Starlink. Elon Musk doesn't like me some days, so what can I say? He gets mad at me. I just think that the posting, I mean, look, it's a law in Washington and we have to deal with it, but I think that it's deterring candidates from applying, and we all know that companies don't half the time hire based in the range. They'll adjust that depending on who they find. So I just think it's discouraging candidates from applying to certain roles.
Mhm. Well, and
I
that's
don't
why
know.
some companies do put it bigger, right? And they're like, well, it depends
Right.
on the level. Like, we could hire a level 3 for this, but if we find a level 6 that's
Right.
stellar, we would budge on the budget or whatever.
Yeah. I don't know if that's true, or I'm just, see it in my own little world, but it just seems like that from a compensation standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of those conversations when I was at my last company with the CEO, right? It's like, well, ideally we'd like to stay here, but then if we find someone stellar, we could go
Right.
up to X, right?
Right.
So that was pretty much it for the questions that people had put in the chat. Happy to take any more. Well, I asked this really one-off question. John, I think this one's a little bit more for you. And this is just coming from a conversation that I had yesterday. We had a workshop and the speaker is in Europe. And she was talking about retention and how to keep your best employees from leaving. And she had just mentioned, like, in quick passing, that in Europe, they're starting to see trends of for women, period leave and menopause leave. And I had never heard of that in the US. So wondering if you're hearing about those types of benefits, if that is something that's way more in Europe and not anywhere else, or just what you're hearing about that, if anything.
Yeah, I think there's some pretty incredible things, kind of more focused areas of support for employees, which, to be clear, I think are always like good things. Like, it's always good to support your employees. And so, yeah, I'm seeing things like there's a company out there called Disclo that really focuses a lot on helping employees that have disclosed disabilities in the hiring process and getting jobs that they may not have had access to. There's specifically like, oh gosh, is it Parentally, I think, that prepares parents for parental leave. So it's software and offerings to help people get to the point where they can actually have an effective maternity or paternity leave. And so I think there's some really awesome things out there. Typically, from what I've seen and heard, the legislature in Europe is more employee friendly. So whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I couldn't say. But I do know that they focus a lot on supporting employees and maybe have some different philosophies on the workforce out there too. So yeah, really cool that I think a lot of that mindset though is also trickling into the US. And there's LSAs are an example of that, where they're really popular in Canada and are starting to kind of like, maybe it's gravity, I don't know, coming south this way. But there's things like that where we can open up kind of and unlock really kind of new ways of incentivizing and not just thinking of employees as like, how can we squeeze the most out of them, but how can we actually help them live a fulfilling life, which is really exciting. And I think that's kind of like the takeaway in the world that we want to try to build at Work Life, is just like, how do we help people live fulfilling lives? Hi, Bob. I'll be done in a minute.
Hey, Kristen, was that broke out from sick leave? They're saying it was an actual separate benefit.
Separate benefit. Yeah, separate benefit. I know. Crazy, right?
No, I want to know what company in Europe, and I'm gone. I'm out. I'm through menopause, people. I'm old, but I want to work there. Can we just, Jonathan, can you find out what company that was?
Yeah.
I'm on it.
I'll ask too.
I'm on it. I'm out.
Karen is saying Spain is doing it. So, well, thank you all for being here. Thank you for everyone attending, and thank you for your really insightful questions. I really enjoyed the conversation. I know I learned a lot from both John and Lola here today. So wanted to thank both of you for all of your time, all of your expertise here. For all of our attendees, I will be sending out a follow-up email in the next day or two with Lola and John's contact information if you want to get in touch with them directly. I'll send out the recording of this as well, in case you want to refer back to anything. Also, quick highlight, we have another public webinar / workshop happening on May 23rd, and that's on women's pay equity. So I think that's going to be a really cool conversation. The woman that we're having present is, she's actually in Canada, but like does a ton of work here in the United States. So please join us for that. Look out for that one. And then last but not least, if you're interested in learning more about Talent Collective, please reach out to me and I'd love to answer any questions or hop on a call. So thanks everybody. And I hope you all have a really nice rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.